That's impossible." The whispered words escaped from Keisha Williams's lips as she stood frozen in the marble hallway of Rashid Al-Mansouri's Beverly Hills mansion, staring at a framed photograph that made her question everything she thought she knew about her own past. The 34-year-old African-American woman had been cleaning the wealthy oil magnate's home for 6 months, but she had never ventured into the private study, where family photographs were displayed on mahogany shelves between leather-bound books and expensive artwork. But today, while dusting the antique furniture, she found herself face to face with an image that couldn't possibly exist. A childhood photograph of herself at age 7, smiling beside a woman she had never seen before, in a location she couldn't remember visiting. The photograph was professionally framed in sterling silver and positioned prominently among other family pictures that showed Rashid with his wife and children during various celebrations and vacations. But this particular image seemed out of place, showing a young black girl in a white dress standing next to an elegant Arab woman in traditional clothing, both of them smiling warmly in what appeared to be a beautiful garden setting. The little girl in the photograph was unmistakably Keisha, with the same distinctive birthmark on her left cheek and the same gap between her front teeth that she had carried into adulthood. The shock of recognition sent tremors through her hands as she reached toward the frame, her cleaning cloth forgotten, as she processed the impossibility of what she was seeing. Every detail of the child's face matched her own features from old-school photos she possessed from her foster care years. Yet this image predated anything she remembered about her own existence by several years. For 27 years, Keisha had believed that her earliest memories began when she was 8 years old, after she had been placed in foster care, following what social workers had told her was the death of her parents in a car accident. She had no photographs from her early childhood, no documentation of her life before the foster system, and no memories of family members or friends who might have known her before that traumatic transition. The social workers had explained that memory loss was common in children who experienced severe trauma, and Keisha had accepted their explanation without question, building her identity around the fragments of information they had provided. Her foster care experience had been a series of temporary placements, with families who viewed her as a temporary responsibility, rather than a child who needed permanent love and stability. She had learned early to be self-sufficient and to avoid asking questions about her past, because the adults around her seemed uncomfortable discussing the circumstances that had brought her into their care, often changing the subject, or providing vague answers that left her feeling more confused than informed. But seeing this photograph challenged everything she had been told about her origins, and raised questions about why a picture of her childhood would be displayed in the home of a wealthy stranger whose family she had never met. The woman standing beside her in the image appeared to be Middle Eastern, possibly Arab, and was wearing expensive jewelry and clothing that suggested wealth and social status. The garden setting looked formal and well-maintained, the kind of private space that would be found on an estate or mansion, rather than in the working-class neighborhoods where Keisha assumed she must have grown up. As she continued to study the photograph, trying to understand how it could exist and why it would be in Rashid's possession, Keisha noticed details that made the mystery even more confusing. The little girl in the image was wearing a dress that looked expensive and custom-made, with intricate embroidery and fine fabric that suggested someone had invested considerable money in her clothing. Her hair was styled professionally, with intricate braids decorated with small pearls and ribbons that would have required hours of skilled work to achieve. The child's posture and expression in the photograph also struck Keisha as unusual for someone from the impoverished background she had assumed characterized her early life. The little girl stood with confidence and comfort, suggesting familiarity with formal photography sessions and social situations that required proper behavior and presentation. Her smile was natural and relaxed, rather than the forced expression that children often displayed when uncomfortable or unfamiliar with their surroundings. Keisha's hands trembled as she removed the photograph from the shelf to examine it more closely. On the back of the frame, she found a handwritten inscription in Arabic script that she couldn't read, along with a date that indicated the photograph had been taken 27 years earlier, exactly matching her current age and placing the image during the period of her life that she couldn't remember. The Arabic inscription was written in elegant calligraphy that suggested both education and care, as if someone had wanted to preserve not just the image, but also important information about the circumstances surrounding it. The discovery of this photograph in Rashid's home suggested a connection between her forgotten childhood and his family that she couldn't begin to understand. The implications were staggering and terrifying, because they challenged the fundamental narrative of her life and suggested that the social workers who had created her identity might have been working with incomplete or inaccurate information about her background and origins. But before she could process the implications of what she had found, the sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly replace the photograph and resume her cleaning duties, her mind racing with questions that she didn't know how to ask or who to ask them of. The weight of the discovery felt overwhelming, and she struggled to maintain her professional composure while her thoughts spiraled through possibilities that seemed both impossible and increasingly plausible. Over the following days, Keisha found excuses to return to Rashid's study whenever she could do so without attracting attention. She memorized every detail of the photograph, studied the other family pictures for clues about the household where the image might have been taken, and tried to match the architectural elements visible in the background with features of Rashid's current home. But while there were similarities in the style and quality of the settings, nothing provided definitive evidence about where the original photograph had been taken or why it was now part of Rashid's collection. Her investigation became increasingly methodical as she developed strategies for examining the study without appearing to neglect her cleaning duties or spend inappropriate amounts of time in areas where personal items were displayed. She learned to work more efficiently in other parts of the house so that she could dedicate extra time to studying the photographs and documents that might provide clues about her connection to the family. The breakthrough came when Keisha discovered a collection of older photographs stored in a drawer of Rashid's desk, images that appeared to document his family's history over several decades. Among these pictures were several that showed the same garden setting from her childhood photograph, confirming that the image had been taken on the grounds of what was probably an earlier family home. But more importantly, she found multiple photographs of the woman who had been standing beside her, images that showed her in various family contexts over a period of many years. The woman appeared to be Rashid's mother, based on photographs that showed her with him as a child and young adult, holding him as a baby, celebrating his educational achievements, and participating in what appeared to be important family milestones and cultural ceremonies. Her name, according to inscriptions on some of the images, was Amira al-Mansouri, and she had apparently died several years earlier. Based on formal portrait photographs that appeared to be memorial images surrounded by flowers and religious symbols. But the most shocking discovery was a photograph that showed Amira holding what appeared to be the same young black girl from Keisha's childhood image in what looked like a formal adoption or custody ceremony taking place in what appeared to be a government building. The official nature of the setting, with formal documentation visible in the background, and what appeared to be legal officials or social workers present, suggested that this had been a legitimate legal proceeding rather than an informal arrangement. The implications of this discovery were staggering and transformative. If the photographs were authentic, they suggested that Keisha had been adopted by or placed in the care of Rashid's mother when she was a small child, and that she had lived with his family for at least some period of time before being placed in the American foster care system. But this scenario raised even more questions about why she had no memory of this period, why she had been told a different story about her background, and why Rashid apparently didn't recognize her despite the fact that she had lived in his family's household. As Keisha continued her investigation into the photographs and tried to piece together the timeline of her early childhood, she began to notice subtle signs that Rashid might be more aware of her identity than he was letting on. He occasionally made comments about her work that seemed to reflect more personal knowledge than would be expected from a typical employer-employee relationship, asking about her comfort and well-being in ways that suggested concern beyond professional courtesy. He had also arranged for her to receive health insurance and other benefits that exceeded what most domestic workers received, explaining this generosity as part of his family's commitment to treating employees fairly. But Keisha now wondered whether his unusual generosity might reflect a sense of personal responsibility for her welfare based on knowledge about their shared history. But the most telling sign was his reaction when she accidentally broke an expensive vase while cleaning his study several weeks after her initial discovery of the photograph. Instead of anger or concern about the replacement cost, Rashid had shown what appeared to be genuine worry about whether she had been injured, asking detailed questions about her physical condition, and insisting that she sit down and rest while he cleaned up the broken pieces himself. The incident had reminded her of how a family member might react to a minor accident, rather than how an employer would typically respond to property damage caused by staff. His concern had seemed disproportionate to the situation and more personal than professional, suggesting emotional investment in her well-being that went beyond normal employment relationships. The decision to confront Rashid about the photographs was difficult and potentially dangerous, as it could result in her losing her job if he reacted poorly to her admission that she had been examining his private family pictures without permission. But the need to understand her own history and identity ultimately outweighed her concerns about employment security, especially as she began to suspect that her connection to his family might be significant enough to change their relationship entirely. The confrontation took place on a quiet afternoon when Rashid was working in his study and his wife was away from the house, attending one of her regular social commitments. Keisha had planned the timing carefully, ensuring privacy for a conversation that might become emotional or difficult for both of them, while also providing opportunities for either of them to withdraw from the discussion if it became too overwhelming or painful. She knocked on the door with unusual formality, her heart racing as she prepared to risk everything for the chance to understand her own identity and history. When he looked up from his work and invited her to enter, she noticed that his expression showed mild curiosity rather than concern, suggesting that he had no idea what she was about to reveal or ask him about. "Mr. Al-Mansouri," she said, her voice trembling with nervousness and emotion as she gathered her courage and pointed to the photograph that had started her investigation. "I need to ask you about this photograph. The little girl in the picture is me, but I have no memory of when or where it was taken, and I don't understand why it would be displayed in your home." Rashid's reaction was immediate and dramatic, more intense than anything she had expected or prepared herself to witness. The color drained from his face completely, and he stared at Keisha as if seeing her for the first time, his eyes widening with recognition that was unmistakable and profound. The transformation in his expression was so sudden and complete that it confirmed her suspicions about his knowledge, while also revealing the depth of emotion that her identity clearly evoked for him. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice barely audible as he struggled to process the reality of what he was seeing and hearing. "Keisha, little Keisha, I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead." The words hit Keisha like a physical blow, confirming that Rashid had indeed known her identity all along, but had believed something terrible had happened to her years earlier. The revelation that he thought she had died suggested that her disappearance from his family's life had been sudden and traumatic, possibly involving the same incident that had resulted in her memory loss and placement in foster care, but under circumstances more complex than what she had been told. "You remember me," Keisha said, her voice breaking with emotion as she tried to process the confirmation that her investigation had been correct. "Why didn't you say anything when I started working here? How long have you known who I am?" Rashid stood up from his desk, with movements that seemed uncertain and careful, as if he was afraid that sudden actions might cause her to disappear again, or that the entire conversation might prove to be some kind of hallucination or dream. His approach was cautious and respectful, suggesting awareness that the situation required delicate handling and mutual consent for whatever revelation or reunion was about to take place. "I recognized you the first day you came to work," he said, his voice heavy with emotion and what appeared to be years of suppressed grief and confusion. "But I thought I was going crazy, because we were told that you had died in the same accident that killed your adoptive mother. I convinced myself that you just looked like her, that it was impossible for you to be alive after all these years." "Tell me everything," Keisha said, sitting down in the chair across from Rashid's desk, with determination that reflected her readiness to face whatever truths he might share, regardless of how they might challenge her understanding of herself. "I need to understand what happened to me, and why I can't remember any of this." Rashid took a deep breath and began to explain the story that Keisha had been unable to remember for 27 years. His mother, Amira al-Mansouri, had been involved in charitable work that focused on helping orphaned children from war-torn regions, using her family's wealth to facilitate international adoptions and refugee assistance programs. Through her connections with international relief organizations, she had learned about Keisha, who had been orphaned during civil conflicts in Somalia when she was 3 years old. Amira had arranged to adopt Keisha and bring her to live with their family in Lebanon, where she had spent nearly 4 years as part of their household, from age 3 to age 7. During this time, she had been loved and cared for as a daughter, learning Arabic and French in addition to English, and receiving the kind of education and opportunities that Amira's wealth and social position could provide. But when Keisha was 7 years old, political instability in Lebanon had forced many wealthy families to send their children abroad for safety. Amira had arranged for Keisha to be temporarily placed with a trusted friend in Los Angeles, while the family waited for conditions to improve, with the understanding that this separation would be brief and temporary. However, 6 months after Keisha's placement in Los Angeles, Amira had been killed in a car bombing that was part of the sectarian violence affecting Lebanon at the time. The woman who had been caring for Keisha in Los Angeles, Sarah Mitchell, had also died unexpectedly in what appeared to be an unrelated accident, leaving Keisha without any legal guardians or family connections who could take responsibility for her care. The timing of these two deaths within a short period had created a bureaucratic and legal crisis that had complicated efforts to maintain Keisha's connections to her adoptive family while also ensuring her immediate safety and care. The trauma of losing two mother figures within a short period, combined with the disruption of being moved between different countries and cultures, had apparently caused the memory loss that had affected Keisha's recollection of her early childhood. Without documentation of her adoption by Amira, or knowledge of her background, American Social Services had created a new identity for her and placed her in the foster care system, working with limited information and making assumptions about her origins that had shaped the narrative she had been given about her parents' death. The social workers had been doing their best with incomplete information, but their well-intentioned efforts had inadvertently severed her connections to her adoptive family and cultural heritage. Rashid explained that his family had spent years trying to locate Keisha after Sarah Mitchell's death, but their efforts had been complicated by the chaos in Lebanon following his mother's assassination, the lack of cooperation from American authorities, and the bureaucratic obstacles that prevented international families from accessing information about children in American foster care systems. Eventually, they had been told that Keisha had died in the same accident that had killed Sarah, and they had mourned her loss while maintaining her photographs as memories of the daughter and sister she had been to them. "When I realized who you were," Rashid explained, his voice carrying the weight of years of suppressed grief and hope, "I didn't know how to tell you without causing more trauma. You seem to have built a life for yourself, and I was afraid that learning about your past might be harmful rather than helpful. But I also wanted to take care of you the way my mother would have wanted. That's why I made sure you had good benefits, and why I've been trying to find ways to help you without being obvious about it." Over the following weeks, as Rashid shared more details about her childhood and introduced her to other family members who remembered her, Keisha began to piece together a picture of the life she had lost. She learned that Amira had loved her deeply and had considered her adoption of Keisha to be one of the most meaningful achievements of her life. She discovered that Rashid had thought of her as a younger sister and had been devastated by the news of her supposed death. The process of recovering her memories was gradual and sometimes emotionally overwhelming, requiring professional support and patience as she processed information that challenged everything she thought she knew about herself. Certain Arabic phrases that Rashid spoke would trigger sudden flashes of recognition, brief glimpses of conversations with Amira, or moments of playing in the garden where her childhood photograph had been taken. Before we wrap this story up, I'd like to thank you for reaching this far. And if you enjoyed this story as much as I think you did, then be sure to show your support by liking and subscribing so this channel. Now, back to the story. Through family therapy sessions and professional support, Keisha and Rashid worked through the complex emotions involved in their reunion after such a long and traumatic separation. The relationship between them evolved from employer and employee to something more like the sibling relationship they had shared as children, with Rashid taking on a protective and supportive role that reflected his genuine care for her welfare and happiness. Most importantly, Keisha learned that her life before foster care had been filled with love, opportunity, and cultural richness that had been completely erased from her understanding of her own history. The recovery of these memories and relationships transformed her understanding of her identity and gave her a sense of belonging that she had never experienced during her years in the American foster care system. Rashid established a foundation in Amira's memory that focused on helping refugee children and supporting international adoption programs, with Keisha serving as program director and drawing on her personal experiences to design interventions that address the emotional and cultural needs of displaced children. The foundation's work became internationally recognized for its innovative approaches to maintaining family connections and cultural identity for children who faced separation from their families and communities. Her story became an example of how family bonds and love could survive even the most traumatic separations and memory loss, proving that some connections are strong enough to survive any separation and ultimately bring people back together when they are meant to be reunited. 5 years after discovering the photograph that changed her life, Keisha had not only recovered most of her childhood memories, but had also created a new family structure that honored both her biological heritage and her adoptive family relationships, while building meaningful work that helped other displaced children avoid the traumatic separation and identity loss that had characterized her own experience.